I'm Lisa Hilmes, and I'm here to talk to you today about a process that my team uses to decide what kind of content should go into a page of a product or a website. Before I get started, though, I did want to say thank you to the organizers, Jesse and Eric, and the sponsors, as well as all of you for being here. It's really an awesome conference, and yeah, I'm excited to be a part of it along with all the other excellent speakers. So who am I? Jesse explained that I work at Limina UX, which is a UX consultancy. There I'm a UX designer, a researcher, front-end content strategist, and I work with about 11 other people. And we take on some pretty complex challenges. So typically, we're solving complex data problems or usability problems, both in the public and the private sector. But when I'm not working, I can be found hiking or skiing in the Rockies or at home in Boulder, painting, gardening, or enthralled in some sci-fi or fantasy story. So this is me on Mount Belford. I found that if you can hike a 14er, then any UX problem after seems pretty manageable by comparison. So after you've done your user research, requirements gathering, and information architecture, you're ready to dive into wireframing, right? Maybe not quite. So there's still an element that you need to define for each page or area of the information architecture, and that's the content outline. And what exactly is a content outline? So I like to think of it as an even more granular level of the information architecture that's created for each defined page. So if an IA defines the tiers of pages, how they're organized, and what their subpages are, then a content outline defines what sections of the content belong in each page, what hierarchy, and what are the subsections within each. In essence, you want to define all of the components that go into a page, indicate where that content comes from, give each item a name, and determine the order and location on the page, plus define where the user goes from there. But what is the actual output? So in essence, a content outline is a collection of text documents. You can store them in a database if you have other specifications that you keep together in one spot, or really anywhere that anyone from the design or technical team can access a folder with all those files. I found that the best way to organize them is to have some kind of codification that corresponds with the information architecture. So if you have a section A, then you can have a content outline for section A 1.1. And a content outline can be written by an individual or it can be written by a group of people. On my team, we do this as a collaborative process. It's our way of sort of duking out who thinks what should go on a page. So it could be a combination of UX or interaction designers, business analysts, solution architects, content strategists, or a combination of anyone from the creative or technical teams. But you may be wondering why you should be outlining your content before wireframing. In the age of immediacy, if a user does not find what they're looking for in a matter of seconds or 50 milliseconds, as we learned from Victor's talk, then they will leave your page no matter how nice it looks or how easy it is to use. Content more than look and feel is how you will gain your users' trust. So before you even consider the design of the page, you need to think about your content first. As award-winning author and content marketer Andrew Davis said, content builds relationships. Relationships are built on trust, and trust drives revenue. So if you want to drive revenue with your site or product, you do need to think about your content first. So digging into this more, why else should you outline your content before jumping into wireframes? So kind of as I mentioned before, it sets up your wireframe for success by giving it the appropriate content the user is looking for. And it's a way of listing out all the necessary components of the page and their subparts before drawing it all out. And this really can save a lot of time and effort of rework in the wireframing and mock-up process. I don't know if you've ever gone through designing out the most beautiful mock-up and then taking it to your technical team, they're like, no, we can't do any of this. You gotta start over. And so this is a way of really nailing them down with what can I do before you put all that effort into the pixel pushing. And it also sets up a successful collaboration with the technical team. So solution architects can use this as a basis for their technical specifications, and it can help define the complexity and cost of a page before it has been wireframed. So that can help your team plan for what can and can't be done within the scope or budget of a project. And it could also help you decide what should go into the MVP. As a bonus, you can start giving names to the sections of the site, and defining the names up front can really help because you might call one thing an announcement and the technical team might be calling it a news story. So being able to come to alignment on this is what this item is called can really help with communication later on. And lastly, it speeds up the wireframing process, because you essentially have a prescription of all of the things that should go into the page. All the legwork has been done, so you can rapidly draw it out without having to break for more research or business analysis. But how do you decide what goes into your outline? So first, you can use a journalistic mindset to better understand who your user or audience is and what their objectives for the page are. As Bob Woodward, one of the two reporters who broke the Watergate scandal, said, the central dilemma in journalism is that you don't know what you don't know. And that's true for design too. You don't know what your users need, so you need to figure out what to ask them to find that out. So in asking questions, you can ask things like, who will be using the page? What do they need to find there? When should they encounter each piece of content? Where on the page does it make the most sense to see that content? Why does the user even care about the content, and how should they see it? You also need to empathize with the user. So empathy is ingrained in UX design, and this is when you should really leverage it. I didn't really coordinate with Victor. He stole the Dorothy idea. But let's look at a scenario for how you would apply this tactic. So say you're designing a web page with a list of job postings. You can close your eyes and pretend you are the user, and maybe you yourself have even been a user using an online job board before, as probably many of us have. So if you can relate back to that time, then you can think about what did you need to see first on the page, and what did you need to see second? And what do you need to see if you decide you want to apply for the job versus what if you choose you don't want to apply for this one? What's your interaction for taking you back to the list? And what if you are thinking about it, but you don't have your materials, you're not ready to apply at this time? What kind of interactions do you need so that you can come back later and apply to this job? So these kinds of questions can help you form a narrative of what the user is going through in the situation, and that can help inform what they need to see on your page in what order. But every product, page, and scenario is different, so your questions are going to change and be just as different as those scenarios. So you can also turn to many resources that can help guide you in determining what the content should go on the page. So first you can turn to your information architecture diagram. For instance, if you're working on a landing page for a section of subpages, you can let the subpages inform what you may need to introduce or discuss on that landing page. You can also look to competitive analysis. See what your competitors are doing and ask yourself if they're doing it well or if you can do it better. One of my design professors from undergrad once said, if someone is already doing something well, then take their best ideas and then make them better. And additionally, if there are already best practices out there in your industry or something that's in a parallel vertical to yours, then you should use those to your advantage and benefit from them having already been ironed out so that you aren't inventing something new that may not measure up. Also, don't forget to look to the existing product or solution if it is already there. Chances are there's a lot of knowledge there that you can expand on, so don't discount that knowledge or any of the efforts that took place in creating that product, no matter how ugly it is or how hard to use. There's probably still some useful information there. And look to your project requirements. So a ton of work has probably already been done by others on your team, and this is a chance to fully review all of that documentation and make sure that none of that wisdom is left out of your work. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, user research artifacts are a wealth of knowledge about what your users truly need and what they desire. So look to the personas, your behavior typologies, content matrices, user journey maps, and any other outputs from this phase, because the worst thing you could do is to put all that effort into research and then not use it at all when it comes to wireframe. Next, I'm going to talk about what order or hierarchy of content works best within a page. So go back to when you stepped into your user's shoes and ask yourself what content should have the most prominence on the page, and likely this will go near the top. You can use the narrative that you crafted to determine what is the logical ordering of content by what the user expects and when. But remember, your outline is really only a hypothesis. So for all hypotheses, they need to be tested and validated that you have ordered everything properly. You can't just say, okay, this is set and done, moving on. You can vet it with your technical team, you can vet it with other designers, users if you can get them, or even stakeholders, anyone who can help validate that, yes, this is what needs to be on the page and determine if there's anything missing. Also, be willing to be flexible and know that even if you've outlined it here, it can't be set in stone. So when content turns to visual design, it's likely that things will still shuffle and move around and reorder, and that's okay. So in thinking about that in another scenario, this time a user is looking up the details of an event. So in following a typical order of operations, you may think a person would want to see all of the information about the event before signing up. So then you would put the sign up button at the bottom. That's what's shown on the left side. But then when you're actually designing the page and laying out all the information, like on the right, you may realize, well, best practice says to put the call to action above the fold so people can see it right away, especially if they're returning to the event. So when you're content outlining, it's hard to predict how long a page will be and where that button will fall based on the order you've set it in. So just let it be flexible, and it's okay if it moves around later. Another thing you can define in a content outline is what page layout or other templates a page will use. So this involves determining where on the page each piece of content should sit. And there are 4 primary areas on a screen, not including the main navigation or footer, which presumably would go on every page. So the 4 areas are the hero area, which is the large image area at the top of the page. You have your body area, which is really the only one that's required of any page. And then you have your optional left and right columns. So when determining which layout to use, you may make rules around different levels of the information architecture. For example, you may set a rule that says all tier 1 landing pages get a single column template with the hero, so that they'll be very visual and entice the users. Or you can make a rule that says all tier 2 landing pages get a 2-column template with the left column and no hero. To determine if you need a left column, you can decide that based on whether the page will have sub-navigation or refiners. So if your page is displaying a list of search results, you'll probably need a left column to house any kind of facets or filters. And your IA can help indicate if it's going to be a search results page. If your page has several sub-pages or is a sub-page of a particular section, you may need a left column to house a submenu, especially if there are more than 5 or 7 items that can't fit across in a horizontal menu. However, if your page's sole purpose is to introduce subpages and nothing else, you probably don't need a left column, and instead you could put all the introductions to those subpages in the body. You can also determine if you need a right column. So first note that eye tracking patterns typically follow the shape of an F, and this is true for pages written in English and other left to right reading languages. For right to left reading languages, such as Japanese or Arabic, they follow a right to left reading pattern, therefore the F tracking pattern is flipped for them. But that means that any content placed in the right column has the potential to not be seen at all, especially if it's things like not shouting at your kids and other articles that aren't really primary to what your goal is. So don't place any primary or secondary content there, because people are very used to ignoring that now. Tertiary content or off-ramps, such as promotions to other pages in the site with related content, can work really well there. In the age of mobile devices, users have become increasingly comfortable with scrolling, so you should question whether there is any downside to placing that content lower on the page instead of in the right column. Stacking it all within the body will make it more responsive out of the gate. And this brings us to the next point, which is, do you really need more than one column at all? A single column page will be the most responsive option out of the box, so that means there's no left or right column, just the body, and therefore you don't really have to determine where does that right column stack in, how do you handle the refiners. But within the body of a single column page, you can still choose to divide the content into 2 columns for readability, or you may include grids of content, such as 4 rows of 5 image tiles across the page. As for the hero image, you can take a stab at determining whether the page should have it, and you can use the hero area to feature content that you want to show immediately in a highly visual way. Or you can use static imagery, a carousel to scroll through different content. Heroes probably will be explored more in detail in the visual design phase, though. Sometimes it's hard to know what content will look best in that area in this phase, with it just being in words. So that was determining layouts at the page level, but you can also determine layouts at a component level too. So you can start to templatize your UI components by defining whether the content should be viewed as a vertical list, a horizontal grid, a form, a static body of content, or others. So now you know what to put in your outline, and you know what hierarchy to put it in. But what level of detail should you use when you're writing one out? As a disclaimer, writing a content outline is not at all the same thing as writing the actual content for a page. Writing the detailed page content requires much more time and finesse, such as matching the brand's tone and voice, capturing every important detail, and using the appropriate terminology, plus optimizing all of that for the best SEO ranking. And that's not the goal of content outlining. It should be more like a shopping list rather than a chapter of a story. So your content outline can indicate when there are different pieces of content in different UI components, when you need a header for a particular section, when a description for a page or list item is needed, when a user needs instructive text for a button or interaction, and none of this needs to actually be written out, just indicated that you need it. For example, when putting in a header, it's more important to indicate that you need the header and to also indicate things like what level of header is it? Is it a title, an H1, an H2, or H3? And you can describe what that header should represent, but knowing that all of it's going to be rewritten later, especially for SEO and for readability. So we've talked about all the different inputs for a content outline. So now let's look at how they all come together on a page. Here's an example of a content outline template that I use, and also the notation. So I use numbers to divide out each piece of content has its own number, and then letters to describe elements about that component. And then I use straight brackets to represent dynamic UI components, and V brackets to indicate if there's a field within that component. Quotations I use to, if I am going to give names to things like buttons or pages, and then regular parentheses I use just to add in more notes. I worked with our tech lead to determine what notation to use up front and what symbols could be identified by both of us. In some cases, the notation can vary by project. So I also worked on a Drupal project where the tech lead preferred curly brackets to straight brackets and preferred straight brackets to V brackets for fields. So to me, it doesn't matter as much what the symbols are that I use, as long as it's consistent for all the pages in the product and the tech lead knows what I'm talking about. So now I'll call out some of the different areas within the content outline. One of the most important things to call out in a content outline is any kind of dynamic content. So that's any content that's being pulled from a system, database, or other integration. This way, your technical team can work with you to make sure it can be pulled in and that all the necessary data is available to support your design. Other things to consider calling out for each component is the name, or what it's called, the type of content being shown, such as is it a news article or an event, what style of list you will use. So do you want to use a vertically stacked list or some kind of horizontal grid with cards? You can determine the display order. So are you going to alphabetize the content? Are you going to rank it from least to most, or use a reverse chronological, so the most recent news articles posted first? And you can also indicate any key metadata that should go in this view. So if you know a list item for an event, it has to have the date and time, plus maybe there's a category of the event, then you can define what that key metadata is. Plus, you can talk about how it should work on mobile. If you can't show as much information on a small screen, you can call out what are the key pieces of metadata that you do want to show, or how else it might interact on mobile. Some pages may not have any dynamic content, so you can call out what types of static content may go there. And this is content that only lives on that one page and isn't being pulled in from any system. So you can call out what it may be called, what the purpose is, and indicate if there are any buttons or links within it and how they're labeled, where they link to, and again, how the section behaves on a mobile device. And that could be like if you have an image embedded in a body of text, do you want that to go between the text or just stack on the bottom when it goes to mobile? You can call out the different page areas or columns as sections of the content outline, and I usually bold those titles so I can find the section I need quickly. You can call out the level of header that should be used by indicating H1 or H2 or H3 next to the section name. If you need to include a description, instructive text, placeholder text, or any other explanation to the user, you can call that out beneath each section of content. And for any interactions the user will encounter, you can include notes about how that will work and what considerations must be taken into account while wireframing. But if in doubt, these are the things that you should include in any content outline. You can give it a page title, description of the page, a list of the different types of content, whether static or dynamic, and for each piece of content, define what format it is and how you interact with it. Include any calls to action, though some pages may have no further action, such as if it's a content detail page. And any off-ramps or links to other places on the site can be called out. Good content outlines will never die. So you may wonder why you should spend all the effort in writing out a content outline if you're just going to wireframe it all later. But if you've done your job right, then the content outline can serve multiple purposes throughout the subsequent design phases and also in development. So solution architects, again, can use it as a basis for their technical specifications. You've essentially given them a template and they can just add more details to it. You, the designer, can use it as a checklist throughout the low and the high fidelity design phases to ensure nothing important is lost along the way. It can be kind of an audit trail for, well, we decided to remove this component, but if you need to revisit it, then it's there later if you want to add it back. And you can repurpose the text as technical annotations to your design. So developers can associate the different content types to where it is located on the page and get some details about what it is and how it operates. You'll likely need to modify or add to it as your design evolves, though, because likely things will be taken out or added in or changed in order. So from this talk, you should now know why you should write content outlines before wireframing, how to determine what should go on the page, how to determine the ordering of that content on the page, and what area of the page template the content should go in, and what notation or level of detail you can use when writing one. So again, this is a process that my team and I use all the time to try to reduce rework and make some of these decisions up front before spending all the time designing. So next time you're tasked with creating a wireframe, first consider if there's an existing content outline that you can work from, or perhaps you should be the person to write it. But remember that the most important thing is for a user to see what they want and need to see on the page, or they will immediately leave it and look for something more relevant. Thank you.